When Love Asks for Nothing, the forgotten tale of Rabi'a al-Adawiyya. That night, there was no moon in the sky. The city of Basra lay silent, as if breathing a long, ancient sigh. The wind slipped through the cracked mud walls of a poor thatched house, where a child had just been born in darkness without a single drop of oil to light the room, without the loud, joyful cries that usually welcome newborns. The baby's parents had gathered the last drops of hope from the drought of poverty, but even an oil lamp on that sacred night of birth was too much to afford. They named her Rabia, which means the fourth, for she was the youngest of 4 daughters. Yet no one in that little home could know that this child, though not a prophet, would one day become a flame that quietly burned in the hearts of millions burdened by pain. When Rabia was only a few years old, her parents died one after the other from illness and hunger. There were no funerals, no proper graves, and no relatives strong enough to keep the sisters together. Basra plunged into one of the worst famines in years, and children like her became commodities in the slave markets. One night, while Rabia curled up in a narrow alley behind the market, a group of strangers snatched her away and sold her to a Jewish man. And so began her life as a slave, a life of beatings, scorn, and forced labor until exhaustion. Each day she moved like a machine, scrubbing floors, carrying water, washing clothes, while her masters treated her as if she were invisible. But something strange happened each night. When everyone was asleep, a different kind of light would glow in the corner of that dark room, the light from Rabia's heart, as she prayed. She did not pray for freedom. She did not curse her fate. Each night, she simply whispered, "O Allah, if you are pleased with this life of mine, then I am pleased too. If you believe I am not yet worthy of freedom, then I accept this pain so long as I know you have not abandoned me." One night, while delivering goods to her master's house, Rabia was shoved to the ground by a passing man. Her arm broke. In searing pain, she only knelt and whispered through tears, "I only need to know, O Allah, that you are watching me with mercy even if my arm is no longer whole." At that moment, in the sacred silence of the night, an invisible voice came to her. "Rabia, do not fear. On the day of judgment, the angels will praise you, and your prayers will save 70,000 sinful souls." Rabia's master, an unkind, godless man who often mocked her prayers, woke up one night and was terrified. Her pitch-black room was glowing with a strange light. There were no lamps, no flames, just a soft radiance from an unknown source, floating above her as she knelt with one hand on her chest, whispering, "O Allah, I love you so much that all the suffering of this body tastes sweet. I do not ask to see you with my eyes, for I already see you with my heart." The next morning, her master approached her, tears in his eyes. "I have lived my whole life in darkness. Yet you, a slave, are light. I no longer deserve to command you. You are free." If you're still watching this video and you're praying that Rabia remains in Allah's protection, please comment the number 1 below to let me know you're here. If you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend subscribing and turning on the bell so you won't miss any videos. Your support helps us keep creating meaningful content to inform and inspire you. Rabia walked out of that house, no possessions, no family, no destination, only a heart burning with love. She didn't return to the world of wealth, nor did she run from it. She found a bare stone corner on the outskirts of Basra and lived as an ascetic, praying, fasting, and reflecting. Each day, she endured hunger for one joy, the night, when she could speak with Allah. It was said that Rabia could sit for hours under the moon, whispering, "O Allah, if hell is the price to love you, then let me burn in it forever." And so, from an unknown slave, she became a symbol, not of suffering, but of unconditional love, a love beyond religion, beyond form, beyond gender, beyond status. Basra was still as cold as the night Rabia was born. But this time, she walked not as a forsaken child but as someone who had rebirthed herself, not through blood and flesh, but through tears and prayer. She had no home, but she needed no shelter. Every stone was a pillow. Every wall a place to kneel. People in the city began whispering, a freed woman, not trading, not begging, just living on air and prayer. Slowly, they stopped talking. They started watching. Rabia never begged, never accepted leftovers. She did only one thing, love God. That love made others uneasy. Sometimes they saw her standing in the rain for hours, eyes shut, arms open as if embracing the storm. Other times, she sat still by a crumbling wall, whispering prayers no one understood, eyes red with tears. One night, she was meditating by the river when a man approached drunk, with a leftover piece of bread and a few coins. He mocked her. "Holy woman, if your God is so great, why are you starving? Take this, eat." Rabia looked up. Not angry. Not ashamed. Just the gaze of a flame too bright to notice the dark. "I am not hungry," she said. "I'm just waiting for my heart to be clean enough to keep praying." The man froze. He took a step back. And for the first time in years, he wept. Rabia continued to live that way silently, yet no one could forget her. Until one day, she was invited to attend a lecture by Hassan al-Basri, a legendary scholar and mystic of the time. When she entered the room, everything fell silent. Hassan, mid-speech, saw her, paused, and asked, "Sister Rabia, if you love Allah so much, have you ever wished to see him?" Everyone held their breath. She stood. Her voice was not loud, but it reached every spine in the room. "No, I don't need to see him with my eyes. Because I have seen him through pain, through love, and through the silence of night. And that is the deepest vision." Hassan stood stunned. The others bowed their heads, suddenly feeling strangely small. Once, in the peak of summer, as the heat scorched the city, Rabia collapsed from exhaustion. A kind woman took her in, offered porridge and water. When Rabia awoke, the woman asked, "Why live like this? No husband, no children, no house, no money. Doesn't Allah want us to live in comfort?" Rabia smiled softly. Not with pity, nor explanation. "I need nothing," she said. "Because everything I need. He already gave me this heart, and with every beat, it calls his name." The woman cried. For the first time in her life, she realized she was poor despite owning everything. Rabia was no saint floating on clouds. There were nights she stayed awake in loneliness, hearing the wind like the distant cries of forgotten souls. Once, she fasted and prayed for 7 days. On the 8th, someone left a tray of hot food outside her tent. Just as she reached for it, a starving cat knocked it over. She didn't get angry. She simply picked up the scattered rice, gathered it gently, and sat in silence for a while. When asked why she didn't complain, she answered, "To eat is not sacred. But to keep peace in your heart when things are lost, that is the miracle." One day, people saw her walking with a bowl of water in one hand and a torch in the other. Alarmed, they asked, "What are you doing?" She replied, "I want to use the water to extinguish hell, and the fire to burn heaven, so that people stop loving God out of fear or for reward and only love him for one reason, because of love itself." Rabia lived 12 years in asceticism. but no one measured that time in days or months. They counted it by the number of sleepless nights, the tears she shed on dry earth, and the moments she sat motionless in crowded marketplaces selling nothing but silence. One autumn morning, as winds from the desert carried a chill southward, Rabia stood up. She carried a small bag not filled with food or money, but only a piece of cloth to kneel on and a thread to mend her patched robe. "I am going on Hajj," she said. "Not out of obligation but because I want to come closer to him, if that's truly possible." No one dared to stop her, even though the path ahead was deadly, especially for a woman with no possessions, no companion, and no means of transport but a frail, trembling donkey that shook with each step. For the first few days, Rabia said little. Only whispers when she stopped by dry riverbeds or passed the abandoned graves along the road. Each step felt like a journey through unseen mistakes, already heavy with karmic weight. One day, as the caravan of pilgrims rested in a scorched forest, her donkey collapsed and died. No sound, no warning, it simply rested its head on the sand, as if it had reached the end of its destiny. Someone from the group offered, "Let me help you. You can ride my horse." She refused. Another offered to carry her bag. She shook her head. "Leave me be. I did not set out for Mecca to be helped. I came to seek him, the one I've given my whole life to." That night, she sat alone in the forest. The wind was strong. No moon. No stars. She looked up and cried out, not in complaint, but in the sob of one who loves deeply and feels abandoned. "Oh Allah, why call me, then leave me in this forest? If I'm excess in your eyes, why not let me die long ago? If I'm not pure enough to meet you, why give me the illusion that I could draw near?" Silence followed. The forest fell still. Then from deep within the night a faint light shimmered where her donkey lay. And then the impossible happened. The creature slowly rose, trembling, shook itself as if waking from a long sleep. Rabia did not gasp. She simply smiled, not because she now had a way to continue, but because she knew he was still watching. Weeks later, Rabia reached the outskirts of Mecca. She saw the Kaaba, that sacred symbol of faith. But she did not run toward it. She stood from a distance, eyes brimming with tears. "Oh Allah," she whispered, "I didn't come to see a stone. I came to see you, if that's even possible." That night, she knelt on the hot earth, her hand over her chest, her lips repeating, "I don't want paradise. I'm not afraid of hell. I only want to see your gaze. Just once." And then a voice formless rose from within her chest. "Rabia, if you were to see me with your eyes, you would be consumed. But if you can love without seeing, then you are my light." She collapsed not from exhaustion, but because her heart was too full. While pilgrims gathered at Arafat, the land of prayer, Rabia did not join the crowd. She climbed a barren hill and stood silently. A man approached and asked, "Aren't you going to pray?" She looked at him and answered gently, "I've prayed my whole life. Now I want to listen. Perhaps he's speaking." When Rabia returned to Basra, no one saw her as the mad ascetic anymore. People looked at her as though they themselves had been reborn, listening to her speak of a pilgrimage with no souvenirs, no tokens, only a heart that had been burned and reborn through unconditional love. And from then on, a legend began to spread. There was once a woman who came to the Kaaba not to see, but to be seen. Since the day Rabia returned from Hajj, her little tent on the edge of Basra was never empty again. People came not to give her anything but to listen. She preached no doctrine, founded no school, had no official disciples. But her words pierced through the thick robes of scholars, tearing apart the flowery language they used to mask the emptiness in their hearts. One day, Hassan al-Basri, the renowned mystic and scholar, came to see Rabia. He did not come alone. 5 companions joined him, all ascetics, learned and simple men. They brought profound questions they had debated for years without resolution. When they arrived, Rabia was sitting outside her tent, sewing her worn sandals with a thread pulled from her cloak. She didn't look up. She simply said, "If you've come to test a weak woman, you've taken the wrong path. But if you've come seeking what you've lost in your recitations, then please, sit." All 6 men sat down in silence. Hassan was the first to speak. "Sister, what does this world mean to you?" Rabia smiled softly. "It is a mirror covered in dust. I've spent my life gently breathing, wiping layer by layer. But I've never tried to see myself in it. I only wait for it to be clean enough to reflect his gaze." One of the men, confused, asked, "But if we don't live for the reward of the afterlife, won't we lose our way?" Rabia looked straight at him. "Those who walk for fear of punishment or hope of reward have not truly loved. I do not fear hell. I do not crave heaven. I only fear that one day I might love him less than he deserves." Once, Hassan was praying beside the Euphrates River. He laid out his mat upon the water and stood there still like an ancient tree in the morning mist. The crowd gathered, awed, whispering praise for his miraculous state. Rabia arrived. She said nothing. She looked to the sky, gently tossed her mat into the air and calmly stepped onto it, standing midair as if on solid ground. The crowd gasped. Hassan blushed. Rabia spoke. "Master, fish swim in water. Bees fly in the air. Why do we do such things? For whose eyes? If love is true, there is no need to perform." One evening, Hassan visited Rabia with an oil lamp in hand. Her tent was completely dark. "Don't you need light?" he asked. Rabia smiled and raised her finger, gently flicking it. Instantly, a warm glow radiated from her fingertip, soft and steady like a lamp, clear as a star. It filled the tent, not burning anything, but warming the hearts of all who saw it. "Master," she said, "the light outside helps us see things. But the light inside helps us see ourselves." Rumors of Rabia's miracles spread through Basra. Some called her a saint. Others said she was a sorceress. Some thought she was mad. She paid them no mind. Each night, she still knelt, still prayed, still closed her eyes and said, "O Allah, perhaps I am unworthy. But I am still here. I have not left. And I will not leave unless you, yourself, send me away." One night, under the bright moon and a gentle northern breeze, Hassan sat beside her. Rabia turned to him and asked, "Have you ever truly loved?" Hassan hesitated, unsure. She continued, "Not love for another person. I mean the kind of love that makes you lose yourself, forget to eat, forget to sleep, forget even your own pride. If you've never known that, you'll never understand what I've been saying." Hassan nodded. And in that moment, he understood, Rabia didn't need to be taught anything. She was the teaching not written in ink, but etched in tears, pain, and undying love. Winter came to Basra. Winds sharp as blades sliced through the mud rooftops and layers of torn clothing. In her small tent on the city's edge, Rabia lay curled up. Her body was now just skin over bone. Each breath felt like crossing the threshold of death. People said, This is the time she needs care. They brought her warm porridge, herbs, and cotton blankets. But Rabia only smiled, nodded gently, and left everything untouched. When Hassan al-Basri heard, he came to visit at once. Inside the tent, he stood in silence, seeing Rabia lying on her side thin as a shadow, yet her eyes still shone like the full moon. "Sister," Hassan whispered, choking back tears, "are you in pain?" Rabia looked at him, her voice light as a breeze. "Physical pain is a gentle knock at the door. But love is the fire in my heart, it burns everything, and I do not want it to go out." That night, close friends gathered around her. No one cried. They simply sat in silence, afraid to disturb something fragile. Rabia held the hand of a young girl, someone she had once saved from suicide after her father died, and said, "When you pray, don't ask for anything. Just love. If Allah wishes to give, He will. If not, then love even more. Because loving Him is already the greatest gift." The girl gripped her hand tightly. For the first time in her life, she understood what unconditional love really meant. At midnight, while the others meditated beside her, Hassan remained awake. He watched Rabia slowly rise, not by her own strength, but as if lifted by an unseen hand. She stepped outside. Moonlight lit her hollowed face, now strangely radiant. She stood in the courtyard, arms lifted to the sky, and whispered, "Oh Allah, if I've lived until this moment, it's not because I deserved to, but because I hadn't yet loved you enough. And if tonight is the night I must leave, I go without fear, because I carry no belongings, only a heart emptied for you alone." Hassan wept. He had never seen anyone die with such brilliance. The next morning, news spread across Basra, Rabia was dying. People came one by one, not to bid farewell to a woman, but to witness a flame extinguishing, not in agony, but in pure peace. Rabia opened her eyes. She motioned for the crowd to leave. Only Hassan and her three closest companions remained. "Make space for the angels," she said. "They are coming." Everyone stepped back quietly. And just as she said, soon the tent was unnaturally still. A strange scent filled the air. The wind stopped. Even the sunlight seemed paused at the edge of the fabric. Then, no more breath. No cries of pain. Only silence, as if a still lake had never been touched. When Hassan and the others returned, they found her lying on her side, hand on her chest, lips curled into a soft smile. No one cried. Because they knew she hadn't died. She had simply dissolved into the love she had pursued all her life. No one knew where she was buried. Some claimed her grave was in Basra. Others said she was never buried at all, but vanished like morning mist into the sun. Whatever the truth, from that day forward, the name Rabia was no longer a name. She became a living legend. A woman who had done nothing the world would call great, yet was great in every breath, every tear, and every prayer born from unconditional love. If you're still watching this video and wish to honor Rabia's soul, please comment the number 8 below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to click subscribe and turn on the bell. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories that inform and inspire. After Rabia passed, her small tent remained untouched. No one dared disturb it. People said, "Every straw, every footprint left behind holds a part of her soul." Some swore they could smell a fragrance rising from the ground, not the scent of flowers, but the aroma of prayers soaked into the soil. Hassan al-Basri didn't return to teaching for a long time. He withdrew into silence, often sitting for hours in the corner of the tent where Rabia used to mend her sandals. When people asked, "Master, why don't you teach anymore?" he answered, "I have preached to thousands but truly listened to only one." One of the women who stayed by Rabi'a's side in her final hours, her name was Nafiya, recalled that on the night before her passing, Rabia didn't sleep. She didn't moan, didn't drift into delirium. She simply whispered strange sentences not from the Quran, not poetry, not even farewells. If a single drop of divine light fell upon this world, it would burn every other fire. When a heart loves deep enough, it no longer needs a name for the one it loves. I've never seen him, but he once lived in my breath. Nafiya didn't understand, but she remembered every word like the final flow of a river about to join the sea. After the quiet funeral, a wealthy man came and placed a chest of gold outside her tent. He was the merchant Rabia had rejected years ago when he asked for her hand in marriage. He said, "I brought this dowry back then, but she refused. I've come now to apologize." Hassan looked at him and sighed. "You're too late." Rabia never belonged to anyone. Not even herself. She belonged to love, and love doesn't need gold. The man bowed his head and walked away, leaving the chest half open beneath the post where Rabia had once hung her cloth bag holding nothing but a piece of dry bread and a sewing needle. People began to argue about how to bury Rabia. Some wanted a shrine. Others said no gravestone was needed. Hassan said, "Bury her like the rest of us in the earth. But let the wind carry her name." And so, Rabi'a's grave bore no name. No headstone. No inscription. Just a patch of flat soil, a few trembling blades of grass, and the faint scent of something sacred whenever the wind passed through. Months later, Hassan met a group of scholars from the West who had come to Basra. They asked, "What made that woman so special? She wrote no books, founded no school, left behind no disciples." Hassan smiled faintly and said, "She didn't need to leave anything. She was the teaching. She didn't need disciples because everyone who met her changed." A young scholar asked, "Then what was the greatest thing she left behind?" Hassan closed his eyes for a moment, then replied, "A silence that forces people to listen. A love that makes us ashamed of how shallow we often love. And a death that taught us how to truly live." One night, Hassan dreamed of Rabia. She was standing in a garden without sunlight, yet every flower glowed with light. She wore white, her hair draped over her shoulders, hands empty, yet it seemed as though she were embracing the entire world. He asked her, "Are you at peace?" She smiled, but said nothing. Then she pointed at his heart. "Keep the fire," she whispered. "Let it not burn from fear, let it burn from remembrance." Centuries later, an Eastern Zen master heard her story and said, "She did not follow any religion. She was religion." And so, Rabi'a's story crossed borders and creeds, becoming a living legend. Of one who loved so deeply she dissolved. Of one who needed no salvation. For she became salvation to wandering hearts lost in the night. The night after Rabi'a's funeral, something strange happened. The people of Basra, from market vendors to scholars in their libraries, all dreamed the same thing. A glowing garden. In it, a woman in a white cloak walked among flowers, yet not a single petal was crushed. The wind blew through her hair, but her face remained unmoved. And whenever she looked at someone, they began to cry. Not from sadness, but because they felt forgiven. For something they'd never dared to confess. They awoke stunned, hollow, but their hearts felt soothed. For weeks afterward, Basra grew quieter than ever. As if the entire city was mourning something more sacred than a person. A woman named Salma, who had once brought porridge to Rabia in her final days, recalled a dream that night. She was standing in a pitch-dark room, no windows, no light. She panicked, collapsing, unsure of where she was. Then, a hand touched her shoulder. It was Rabia. She didn't speak. She simply raised one finger. And instantly, the roof vanished. White light poured in like a waterfall, bright, but not blinding. In that light, Salma saw herself. But a version of herself that was peaceful, unafraid, without regret, needing nothing. When she woke, she sat still for hours. From that day forward, she gave up her gold trading business and became a caregiver to orphans. The story spread. A Jewish cleric, Rabia's first master when she was a slave, also dreamed of her. In his dream, he stood lost in a desert, his throat burning with thirst. No direction. No hope. Suddenly, a white figure passed by, said nothing, and left a small water pouch beside him. When he drank it, the desert disappeared. He saw a stream flowing within his chest, washing away every trace of bitterness. The next morning, he renounced everything. He became a hermit outside Basra, taking no students, only planting flowers and giving bread to travelers. Hassan al-Basri saw her in dreams more than anyone. Whenever he was weary, lost faith, or felt his sermons becoming hollow, she would return. Sometimes she said nothing, just gazed at him from afar. Sometimes she would whisper, "Don't preach about Allah as if he is far away. Live as if he is in every grain of dust upon your hand." Once, crying, he asked her, "Why did you leave no book? No final teachings?" She replied in the dream, her voice soft as mist, "Because words die with memory. Only love remains." Years later, some of Hassan's students formed a small Sufi order built upon 3 public sayings Rabia once shared. "I do not love Allah because I fear hell, nor because I desire paradise. I love him, because I cannot not love him. If you pray for reward, you are a merchant. If you pray from fear, you are a slave. But if you pray from love, you are free. With each breath, I die a little, so Allah may have more space within me." They built no shrine in her name. But every year, on the anniversary of her death, the people of Basra walk barefoot through narrow streets, carrying nothing but a single white flower. They say nothing. They simply remain silent. Just as Rabia lived. Once, an orphan child asked his teacher, "Master, was Rabia an angel?" The teacher smiled, stroked his head, and replied, "No, my child. She was human. And that is what made her extraordinary." Years after Rabia left this world, as her presence began to fade from common tales, a strange phenomenon began. People who had only glimpsed her once, even those who barely exchanged glances, started to remember. Snippets of things she said, gestures, fleeting moments, all resurfaced. And each recollection changed the course of their lives. The blind man's story from the Basra market. An old, blind man made his living playing a sad melody on a string instrument near the market gate. He didn't play to earn, he played to mourn the son who had gone to war and never returned. One drizzling evening, Rabia passed by. She didn't stop for the music. She stopped for the silence. The old man stopped playing when he heard her footsteps pause. She asked, "You cannot see, "But have you ever seen the most precious thing?" He said nothing. She continued, "Those with sight often see others. But the blind have the chance to see themselves." Years later, the man told the story. From that day forward, he began to play new songs. No longer sorrowful, no longer bitter. When asked why he changed his tune, he replied, "Because a woman once made me hear light." The story of the boy who stole a loaf of bread. One cold winter afternoon, a group of street children huddled around a bakery's warm oven. One boy took a chance slipping a hot loaf under his shirt. The baker saw him, grabbed him, shouted. Rabia walked by. Saying nothing, she gently pried the woman's hand off the boy. She took a torn coin from her cloth bag, perhaps the only thing she had left, and said, "This bread. I bought it." The baker hesitated. The boy trembled. Rabia tore the bread in half. She gave one half to the boy, and ate the other slowly. Then she said, "Sin doesn't live in fast hands. Sin lives in hearts that have never been full." After that day, the baker began placing a small loaf near her door each morning. No one ever took it. But the poor children knew. It was the loaf from the gaze of kindness long ago. The nameless man by the river. A man once stood on the banks of the Basra River, ready to end his life. He had nothing left, his wife gone, his child estranged, debt drowning him. He took off his coat and prepared to jump, when a hand touched his shoulder. Not forceful, not pleading, just a gentle touch. But it made him stop. "If you die today," the voice said, "perhaps no one will remember. But if you live one more day, you might become the first person to forgive yourself." He turned. Rabia was already gone. Years later, that man became a teacher for orphans. He never told that story until his deathbed. And then he whispered to his students, "My life did not begin with my birth. It began with a touch." The story in the dark. One moonless night, a group of men tried to secretly rob graves behind the cemetery in Basra. They didn't know anyone was watching. They weren't afraid of people, only of being caught. As they prepared to break open the first coffin, a voice rang out from the shadows. "When you take from the dead, have you ever given anything to the living?" No one saw the speaker's face. But one man dropped his tools in panic and ran. He never touched a shovel again. The other, years later, became someone who carved gravestones for the nameless, free of charge. These stories were never written in books. They weren't taught in schools. But they lived, whispered across generations. And every time someone speaks Rabia's name, they say, no one knows exactly what she did. Only that, after meeting her, no one remained the same. There was a small notebook Hassan al-Basri kept hidden away. He never annotated it. Never opened it in front of others. Not scripture. Not philosophy. But the words Rabia had once written. Not to God, but to the living. When Hassan grew old and lay on his deathbed, he called his 3 closest students and handed them the notebook. "Read this," he said. "When you no longer feel capable of love, when your heart grows cold, when your faith disappears, that's when this book will open." 3 years after Hassan passed, the notebook was opened for the first time. And each line inside still felt warm, as if written yesterday. To those who have been abandoned, when they didn't choose you, do not resent them. For you were chosen by a love that asks for nothing. That love has no face. it is the wind touching your cheek at midnight. The smell of bread at dawn. The invisible embrace that holds you up when you're about to collapse. To those who have betrayed, you are not evil. Just souls who haven't learned to keep promises to yourselves. If one day you want to return, don't look for those you wronged. Look for the child inside you. The one who once believed you'd keep your word. And ask its forgiveness. To the woman left behind on her wedding night. Don't shatter mirrors. Don't cut your hair. Don't wear mourning. Light a candle. Walk barefoot into the yard. And ask the sky. He may no longer love me, but I still have me. Is that enough to live on? To those who have thought of death, don't call it an ending. It is merely a door that opens too early before you've learned what the dark is for. Try to live one more day, but not like yesterday. Live as if someone has cried, thinking they might never see you again. To those who pray and hear no answer, perhaps your prayer was already answered, just not how you imagined. You asked for light. He gave you darkness so your eyes could learn to open. You asked for love. He gave you loss so your heart would learn how to soften through pain. To those who loved deeply and were hurt, be grateful. For no one loves deeply without pain. And no one who suffers deeply will stay asleep. If you're crying today, then weep for the old self that has died. And open the door to the new self. The one who can love without clinging. And let go without fear. The handwriting was shaky, but each stroke cut deep into the soul. Not eloquent, not lofty, just the quiet, ruthless tenderness of a soul that had reached the ends of love, of loss, of forgiveness, of emptiness, and silence. The notebook was passed from hand to hand. It was never copied. Each person could read it only once, then return it. But every reader fell silent for a long time afterward. No one cried. No one shouted. Only a strange, aching feeling left their heart. Then, lightness. One day, an orphan boy who couldn't read held the notebook. He couldn't understand the words. But as he hugged it to his chest, he burst into tears. As though a familiar voice had whispered, "It's okay. Someone once understood you, before you even knew how to speak your pain." And so, no one remembers the exact day Rabia was born, or the year she passed. No one can confirm her lineage, her family, her origin. All people know is this: that at some moment in time, there lived a woman who asked for nothing, kept nothing, but gave everything, quietly, like light falling on the surface of still water, and the prayers that never aimed for heaven, to this day, still echo in the hearts of those who have loved without being loved in return. One autumn, many years after Rabia had left the world, a young woman wandered the sand dunes south of Basra. She wasn't searching for anything, just needed to walk. On her back, a tattered cloth bag. In her mind, unanswered questions. Why do people love so much, and still feel empty? Why do prayers go unheard? Why has no one ever held me back, not even once? She sat beside a flat mound of earth. No stone. No flowers. Only wind. She cried not loudly. Just like the last person in the world, who suddenly remembered she was once a child. Once wanted to be held. Once needed someone to say, "Don't worry, I'm here." And then, she felt something. Not a hand. Not a light. Just presence. No name. No source. Only a silent being, who somehow knew every crack in her heart without needing to ask. She bowed her head. "If you ever existed," she whispered, "don't give me strength. Let me stay weak but not lose faith. Don't comfort me. Just give me courage to keep walking, even if nothing lies ahead." Years passed. That child became someone who healed. She had no special name, wrote no books, preached no sermons. She simply walked through the darkest places. Prisons, orphanages, hospitals, red light alleys. And whispered to those on the edge, "It's okay. Someone once walked through this." And they never blamed anyone. She never mentioned a name. No one ever asked. But everyone who left her arms carried a small flame inside. Something inextinguishable. Something beyond words. And so, centuries passed. And no one remembered Rabia anymore. Other graves became shrines, adorned with towers. Other saints had books written, names praised, rituals built around their memory. But the place where she was buried was just a patch of land along a path no one walked anymore. And yet, on certain misty, moonlit nights, some wanderer who's lost their way might unknowingly pass by. And in that moment, when they believe they've reached the very end of loneliness, they may hear the gentlest wind, as if a deep, sorrowful woman's voice, ageless and calm, whispers, "You are not unloved. You have only yet to learn how to love without needing to be loved back." No one sees Rabia anymore. But sometimes, people suddenly realize there's a prayer inside them that was never spoken. There's a light in them that no one ever taught them the name for. There's a small flame that no one knows who lit. And when they sit quietly, long enough, deep enough, they'll know she is still here. Not in name, but in everyone who knows how to love without holding on. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share one thing this story taught you, and how you'll carry that into your life. Your voice matters. Reading your reflections brings strength, healing, and inspiration to us all. If this story moved your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue creating stories that uplift, heal, and awaken the soul. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.